Writing your book. So now, at this point, the assumption is you've done your outline, you're ready to start writing, the fun starts. Let's get going. So I'm going to tell you to cast off most of the writing advice you've heard in the past. Because remember what I told you, we talked about this. Most of what you've heard is not useful. Why though? Because most writing advice is actually written by writers to impress other writers. It's not about helping non-professionals like you or about helping the reader. Right? If you actually go read, my favorite example of this. Most of you probably have heard of the book Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. It's a terrible book. If you actually want to learn how to write, it is a terrible, terrible book. And I'm not saying this out of jealousy. I've sold way more copies than that woman has. She's a perfectly fine writer. If you like her novels or whatever, cool. That book is not good. It does not tell you what to do. It just tells you what you're supposed to do as a fancy writer. It's total bullshit. I can't stand it, right? I can't tell you how many people we've had to unpack their bad ideas in Guided Author and get them onto things that actually work, right? There are some, I'm trying to think about books on, there really aren't, man. There's like, I like Zen and the Art of Writing by Ray Bradbury. There's a couple of others. Stephen Pressfield's stuff is good. But there really are not a lot of books that are very tactical that really help you do step-by-step stuff in writing. That's what we're going to teach you right now. I said this already. I'm going to come back to it. There's really actually only one rule in writing is do what works. Okay? So everything I'm going to tell you, if it doesn't work for you, do something else. But the reason I'm telling you this is because we have tested this with thousands of authors and we know it works. Okay? So the first step when you sit down to write, number one step is you need to give yourself permission to write a mediocre first draft. Because most of you are going to sit down with all these expectations and all this heavy pressure on yourself, and you've got to release that in order to write this book. So how do you do that? How do you give yourself permission to write a mediocre draft? We have a really cool technique. It's called vomit draft, right? So we don't talk about first drafts at Scribe. We talk about vomit drafts. And why do we call it a vomit draft? Because no one cares about looking pretty when you vomit. You just want to get it out. That's the goal of your vomit draft. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be perfect. It's just getting it out and onto paper. Okay? So let's just this means, let me be really clear about this. When you're writing your first draft, your vomit draft, we tell people do not stop, do not edit as you write. Seriously. I know this sounds crazy. Do not stop, do not edit. Keep going with your vomit draft until it's done. I'm not even looking at the chat, but it's probably going crazy. When we talk about this in workshops, people look at us like we're demented. This is one of those things. You remember in the morning, all those authors said, oh, the vomit draft, thank God they talked about the vomit draft technique over and over. There's a reason why, okay? In fact, I want you to say this out loud. We're all going to say it, right? So they can hear us. We actually do this in the workshop. I'm not kidding, like kindergartners. All right, you guys ready? I will not read or edit my vomit draft until it's done. I know it sounds... Go ahead.
Let me just jump in and second you, Tucker, because I work with Emily and I work with the guided authors after the workshop. This is one of the hardest things for people to do, is to stick to this promise. It's really hard to set aside your own self-judgment and do this. But if you can do it, you will have done one of the very hardest things that's in the way of writing your book.
The hardest thing for most people is getting the first draft done. And this is the best technique I know of to get the first draft done. It's called the vomit draft, and do not read it or edit it or even look at it. All right, but I'm going to keep going with tactics on this because it's actually important. So
I do want to pause for just one moment because Martine on the chat pointed out that Pam earlier in our panel discussion said that if she could do it over again, she would have spent longer on her vomit draft and gone slower. Let's speak to that because that's a little different than keeping yourself from vomiting.
Right. So what Pam did, so I know exactly what Pam did. When she means she would have taken a lot longer and written more. and dove in more and not edited. Stephanie specifically talked about how, oh, wow, I like, every time I went back and read stuff, I would get stuck editing. She talked about, I know Pam did the same thing. She didn't specifically talk about that. And that's one of the reasons why she wrote so little in her vomit draft, is because she saw what happened when she edited. So she was like so anxious about it. She's like, I'm just going to go as fast as I can and get it all out. But she didn't get it all out. She just sped through the vomit draft so she could get to editing. This is going to sound weird, but there is a part of you, most of you, that is highly resistant to writing this book. There's a great book about this. If you're going to read a book on writing, this is the book to read. It's called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And the entire book is about a concept that he calls the resistance. And what the resistance is, essentially on a psychological level, is, let's just call it self-judgment. And it is the part of you that does not want you to change, right? It wants you to stay the same. And that part of you will do anything possible to sabotage you doing things that will level you up or, make you worse, but especially level you up. Writing a book is going to level you up. It's going to change you, okay? And so this technique is a way to route around that. It's a way to deny the resistance, its traction, its foothold. But you can always find a way. I mean, Pam's resistance got her to speed through the vomit draft so she could get to the self-judgment part better. And then when she got to editing, she had to spend a lot of time in there, and she had spent a lot of time on calls with us working through her emotional issues with this in order to get through editing. So that's why that's what was going on with Pam. Does that make sense?
Hey, Tucker, let me jump in. There are a bunch of questions popping up. I know you've been as clear as you can about this. I want to try to restate what you just said. When we talk about vomit draft, we mean you write the whole book without going back and reading any of it. You don't go back and check for typos. You don't vomit a chapter and then read that chapter. You do the entire book and you let it suck. The first draft. Yes. Give yourself permission to write a shitty book. Some of you said, oh, I'm cringing about this. Yes.
Yes, you should be. That means if you're cringing about it, that means you're doing it right, because that's your judgment coming up. That's your protective ego part of you saying, oh, no, you can't write anything. It's not perfect. That's why you haven't written a book yet, right? This is how you get around that. You don't have to do this. It's fine. Just sit at home and continue not writing your book, or do this. It works. Okay.
Tucker, what if you're writing your vomit draft and you actually start vomiting?
Well, then you're going to make it a real vomit draft and not a metaphorical one, I guess.
From the discomfort you have.
If you start vomiting from the discomfort, first off, I've never heard of that happening. I've heard of people getting ill, it's very hard for them not to go back and edit. But if you do that, that means you have you need to go back to the self-care section. I don't mean this as an insult because I'm in therapy. I would seriously get some real therapy because you have some emotional identity and attached to this book. And so you're trying to use the book to do therapy where you're better off just doing the therapy. And you can write the book separately, but you're connecting your therapy to the book if you have that strong of a reaction to it. Absolutely. Again, ask me how I know. We've only helped thousands of authors through this. We've had to become experts at Scribe in working high accomplished, high motivation people through their emotional blocks, because so many people have, not all of our clients by any stretch, but so many have emotional blocks around books that are tied to identity and judgment, shame, success, things, fears. We're going to finish with fear. We're going to get to this when we really dig in with the fear. But yeah, this is all absolutely. So when Hal says you're writing your whole book without looking at any part of it, you're writing your whole book. And again, you're not going to publish it. You're just doing the first draft. So let me keep going. Listen. If you need another trick to help you, because a lot of people are like, well, if I don't read back what I wrote, then how do I know where to start? A good trick is you stop writing each day in the middle of a sentence. That way, the next day you can start with that sentence. I'll give you permission to read the sentence that you stopped in the middle of to know where to start, and then you can keep going writing. Another thing, what if you write the same thing multiple times? A bunch of you are probably asking that question. It's a good thing. That's great. That's how cops get to the truth. I don't know how many of you have ever been interrogated by cops. I have. And what they do, one of their classic iconic techniques is they will ask you the same question multiple ways at multiple different times, right? And then the way they know you're telling the truth, generally speaking, is if you repeat the exact same thing word for word every time, then they know you've memorized something and you're probably lying. If you're telling the same core truth, then some of the details will vary a little bit. And then that's why they ask you a bunch of times to see which details are varying so they can figure out what's true and what's not in your story. If you write the same story 2 or 3 times, it's okay. You're going to have 2 or 3 different versions and you're going to see which part is best. And the intro might be best for one, the conclusion another. You can put them all together. It's not that bad of a thing. Furthermore,
Tucker, someone wanted to know what goes wrong if they don't follow our advice here on this.
It depends. So like I said, there are people who've written their book without doing this, but if you're here, it means you haven't. And it probably because the techniques you used in the past don't work. So you're welcome to try and ignore this. You are more than welcome to. I'm just telling you, man, the road to finished books are littered with the bodies of authors who thought they could just do it their own way. And it didn't work. Like,
littered with the manuscripts. They don't die.
You're right. Littered with the manuscripts is a better metaphor. Part of their soul dies, though, but that's a different discussion. So, guys, none of this stuff we're teaching you is like, this is not theory. This is not dogma. This is not what we think should work. This is what works. This is what we have tested. We've tried so many different things. This is what works. And our process changes as we grow. Like during this teaching of this webinar, I've already figured out a couple of things I know we need to tweak about teaching this to make it clear. And then as we develop a guided author, and we have hundreds go through, like FocusMate. FocusMate's probably going to become part of what we teach now, right? If so many guided author people are using it and it works well. Did you guys freeze? No.
Nope.
Okay, good. You were all just super still. I was like, oh man, I hope we didn't drop again. So as this process develops, we change it and we iterate it based on feedback. Like we're practitioners in the trenches doing this, getting paid to do it. And we get paid by results. So you're welcome to try other things. And if they work for you, cool. But if you've tried shit before and it didn't work, it's probably why. So here's another technique authors use. Some authors write in strike through so they can't read it. You can make strike through on any word program, word processor. This works really well. So that way, as you write, you just don't read. You just write straightforward, right? There's no software you need. I'll tell you there is a piece of software you could use if you want. It's called IA Writer. And they have a thing called focus mode where the stuff is grayed out except for the line you're working on. That also works really well. Now here's a big key, is remember that no one's going to see your vomit draft but you. No one on earth. Like even the guided author people who are working with us, they do the vomit draft first and then they edit it multiple times before they give it to us to edit, right? And so my assumption is you're going to do that as well. Whoever you have edit your book, this is just your first draft. And the reason we tell you to call it a vomit draft is so you know I'm just getting it out. That's it. Then the next section we teach is how to edit. And you definitely go back and edit. You're not going to publish this. That would be a disaster. No one wants to read that. Like, this is just for you to help you get it out. Most people who don't finish their books get stuck on the first draft, either because it's not positioned well, they don't have a good structure, or they cannot get past the self-judgment and they can't stop editing, and they get stuck and lost and they get spun in circles. All right. Are there other questions coming up?
There's one good one, which we'll actually cover in the editing section, but the average number of drafts it takes to get to a good book. We're
going to do that in editing. All right. So why does this work? So I want to dive deeper into this because this is one of the most important things we teach in terms of actually finishing your book. Vomit draft suspends self-judgment, subverts anxiety. So we kind of talked about this. I went on a little rant already and talked about this. Hemingway said it, the first draft of anything is shit. The second reason this really works is it creates momentum. If you are not editing every day is not momentum, at the beginning especially. right? But at the beginning, if you're putting down your words every day, new stuff every day, even if you think it's crap, it's fine. You're getting momentum. And what's going to happen is you're going to come back. I got a million quotes. This is every author thinks that their vomit draft is terrible, and they come back to edit and they're like, oh, wow, it's way better than I thought it was. Always, every single time. Let me tell you a really good anecdote that explains this. So there's a ceramics class, right? And the ceramics teacher stands up, and then everyone's at this long table. She divides the class in half. And on the right half of the class, she says, you guys are going to be graded on poundage. So literally the number of pounds of the pots you throw is your grade. 500 pounds is an A, 400 pounds is a B, etc. So start throwing pots. And then she turns to the left side of the class and she says, you guys are going to be graded on one pot, your best pot. So a perfect pot's an A, one flaw is a B, two flaws is a C, etc. So go do your perfect pot. And so the whole semester, the right-hand side is throwing pots and throwing pots and throwing pots. And the left-hand side is obsessing over one pot, right? They're all theory, like thinking about, oh, how do I throw a perfect pot? They're just obsessed with perfection. So she brings them all back at the end of this semester. And she says, all right, I'm sorry I lied to you about how I'm going to grade. She turns to the right hand of the room. She says, everyone's being graded on one pot. So go to your massive hundreds of pounds of pots, pick out the perfect one, the best one you have, and bring it over. And then she goes to the perfection people and says, or the one pot people, and she says, bring your pot. You want to guess how this ends? The people who were graded on poundage ended up realizing that they had several pots that were perfect. And so all of them got A's, even though they weren't trying to do perfection, right? They got so good at throwing pots that by the end, most of their pots were nearly perfect, if not perfect. All of them got A's. Except there was one dude who's a total slob. He got a B. But all the rest got A's. Whereas the one pot people, they all got D's and C's because they obsessed over perfection so much, they didn't actually learn how to throw pots. And the only way to throw pots is practice. The same thing is true for writing. If you obsess over it, you will not finish it. If you let that obsession, that judgment go and practice, you will get good enough to put out your book. It's that simple. I hope that answers all your all's questions and anxiety about this. I get it. I get why you're anxious about this. This is really weird to a lot of people. This is what Katrina wrote. This is, again, from Guided Author Group. I love how every time I'm tired of feeling those I'm not connected, having an off day or writing drivel, I just remind myself it doesn't matter. It's a vomit draft. I'm allowed to. Makes it so easy to keep showing up. You see, that's the point. Makes it easy to show up. Next one, Sylvie. Best part is how much I'm enjoying writing. I was killing all the joy by editing as I wrote before. So glad I attended the workshop to learn the fundamentals. All right, any other questions just about vomit draft, not about editing or all this other stuff, because we're going to cover that.
Yeah, I'm seeing a bunch of questions, and I know you talked about this. Talk about it again, please. People are concerned about, well, what if I'm writing and I need to do a bunch of research?
Oh, for fuck's sake. Okay, first off, you probably don't need to do research. All right? Maybe you do, but there are some set of people who are obsessed with research don't need research. That's their resistance trying to find a way to stop them from writing the book. Okay, I'm not saying you are or you aren't. I don't know. But that is, in my experience, anywhere from 25 to 50% of people who are obsessed with research don't need to do any goddamn research. Okay, now there is another set that do. All right, if you need research, then the way I would do it is either do all the research ahead of time, right? Although I actually wouldn't recommend that because that's a good way to get stuck. So then, do the research you need to do ahead of time to feel confident, okay, I'm ready to write. And then as you start writing, if you feel like, I don't know this stuff, then you can go research, that's fine. But just don't break the rule of going back and reading and editing. Because what that forces, it will definitely take more time, but it forces you to keep going forward, to keep moving, keep writing. And yeah, you're going to cover the same thing 3 or 4 times. Okay, no problem, right? You're just going to get better each time. So then when you come back to edit, you're now going to have the same stuff multiple times. All right. Now, there's another way though. those two things, either research ahead of time or a chapter to chapter, or don't research, are for people who are writing books where they've been doing this for 10, 20 years. They know the knowledge. If you are doing a book, you don't have the knowledge yet, and you need to build the research to write the book. Now that's a different question, okay? For those people, I would tell you to dedicate a certain amount of time to reading and research before you even finish the outline. Like, you should be doing the research with the outline. So for example, I'm just going to make up a scenario. Let's say you're 23, you're new in your career. You want to write a book on how to use marketing to scale a construction business, but you don't really know marketing. You know marketing a little bit. You don't know construction very well. Okay, cool. So the way to write that book is to interview experts, marketing experts about their field, and then people who are doing construction really well, right? Or marketing construction well. And so you can accumulate a bunch of knowledge about marketing and construction and then write the definitive book about it. That book, you need to research way ahead of time, right? So you need to do all those calls, all those interviews, all that reading, and that will help you construct your outline. Then you'll have your research, and then when you sit down to write, you'll be ready to write all that stuff. The other technique, and I had a slide on this, I think I skipped over it with you guys asking all these questions, screwing me with this stuff. No, I'm kidding. Is when you get to a point, this is a very common, very useful technique. You're going to get to a point where I do this all the time. I'm writing something, and I'll think of a quote, right? Like we were doing yesterday with the professional amateur quote. That was today. And I'll get obsessed with the quote. So I'll be like, oh God, I got to go find it. And then I'll go down a 2-hour rabbit hole of research on the internet and stop writing. Don't do that. What I do now is I just comment, insert quote research later. So when I finish my vomit drafts, they'll have 100 comments on them. Like, this sucks, fix it. Or go research this later. Or go get the data for this later. That's totally fine and normal. So especially if you kind of know your subject well, but you don't remember every study or everything, then go through and write it. And as you're writing, just call out the parts where you're going to need to research later, and you do that in editing. Is that answering questions? Does that do it?
I think that's helping out a lot. I got one other thing I want to share here, Tucker. I don't know if you want to get into this or not, but I want to bring it up because it's illustrative of a problem that some people get into. I've seen several comments from people who say, I'm not sure my positioning is right, but I'm really excited to get going writing. And my advice to them is like, no, get your positioning right. And somebody here, a guy named Tucker Ray, said he actually has a draft that's 400 pages long, and he's been told now that he actually has 2 books in one. He has both an
at least.
And it's because, and what I was about to write to him, but I wanted to share this to everybody. Like, this is what happens if you don't get your positioning right. He has an enormous amount of wasted effort here because he didn't get the foundation correct, and he blended these 2 books, and now he's asking for advice on how to untangle it, and it's almost impossible.
I call it exploratory effort rather than wasted effort. Sometimes people need to really get a huge vomit out before they can even understand where their different ideas lie.
Emily is nicer than I am, and says nice things like that.
Hold on. The subtext here is that dude, and I don't know him specifically. I'm just talking about most people who are in that situation are using their book for therapy instead of going to therapy, right? And so and again, I journal, if you need to journal 400 pages of stuff to figure out what you think, totally valid and cool. Nothing wrong with that. And you may end up using a lot of that stuff in a book, but do not mistake that for writing a book. That is not the same thing. And that is, how many people do we have in Guided Author who come in with hundreds of pages of material? A lot. I would say a third to a half of people who show up at Guided Author have started their book. They didn't start with this method. They started with their own method or some other method they read somewhere, and they got lost and they got stuck, and they come to us to unstick, right? And so we always make them start with positioning, then structure, then outline every single time without exception. And what they find is anywhere from 90% of what they wrote to 10% or less is usable, right? But what the mistake a lot of these people make, and you're probably trying to make, is how do I take what I've written and make a book? No. You need to figure out what book you're trying to write first. Then see if anything you've written fits.
This advice is gold. I made the exact mistake you're talking about and felt
I
like
remember.
I wasted. Yes. Thank God a book emerged from that, but there were hundreds and hundreds of pages that never saw the light of day because I screwed up at the beginning with the positioning and the therapy element. So listen to Tucker. This is super important.
Yeah, and I'm not looking down on therapy or using books for therapy. I do it. I mean, I'm two hands in the sky as someone who does this, right? So, but like, just stop thinking that writing a book can make up for not doing therapy. It does not work. I wish it did. That would be amazing, but it doesn't. All right, writing principles. Let's go over these quickly. We'll get to editing. Very simple. Make it short, make it simple, make it direct, make it about the reader. Those are the 4 Scribe writing principles: short, simple, direct, about the reader. Okay? These all sum up into one principle. Clear writing is good writing. You are not right. Don Miller has a great quote about this too. I think I might put this in the slides. Writing is not a performance, it's a service. Okay? Clear writing is good writing. Unclear writing is bad writing. It's very, very simple. Okay? There it is. I did put it in. If you guys know Donald Miller, he wrote Blue Like Jazz. He's written a bunch of amazing memoirs. He's a fantastic writer.
A Million Miles in 1,000 Years.
Million Miles in 1,000 Years. Father Fiction. It's great.
Story brand too.
Story brand, of course. So he has a company now, just like me. He's a few years ahead of me. There's a simple way to accomplish all these principles. Write your book to one person. This is why one of the reasons we do the avatar exercise. Because if you are connected to your audience, to one person, then you are actually writing a functional book. If you're just writing to nobody, that's how you get 400 pages of mess, right? And again, I actually like Emily's framing. Sometimes you got to take a meandering path to get where you're trying to go. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't mistake it for the actual direct path, okay? Steinbeck, pretty good novelist, said this: forget your generalized audience. It will scare you to death and it doesn't exist. In writing, your audience is one single reader. I found that sometimes it helps to pick out one person, a real person you know, and write to that one. Does this sound familiar, guys? We already did this, right? Another one, Roy H. Williams, greatest living ad writer. The more specifically you write to one person, the more powerfully you write to everyone. Remember this slide? Tim Ferriss wrote 4 Hour Workweek in an email to 2 friends. I wrote all my bestsellers in emails to friends. Or that was the mental frame, right? They literally both started that way, and then that became the mental frame. 9 New York Times best-selling books. We're over 10 million books sold between us. This works, all right? Speaking to one person works because it makes your book relevant. If it's relevant to one person, then it's almost certainly relevant to more. Remember what Leanne said earlier about like the girl with the dog-eared version, and she was like in tears, and like if that's all that happens, it was worth it. If one person does that, there's going to be a whole lot more. Right? But then also it makes your book easy to write because now you're being in service to someone and you're not stuck in your own head. There's an external mirror here. It's why this process works, right? How we teach to write, because every month 20 new authors show up and force us to have our shit correct. If this was just me sitting in my library pontificating on ways to write books, it'd be bullshit. I'd be an academic, right? But this is actually battle tested every single month. In fact, every week, Hal and Emily get on calls with people.
Wow, I'd want to be in your class, Tucker. I can't see you grading papers. I just don't.
Oh, I'd be the worst. The worst. The worst.
You
the
would
worst.
not get tenure. Let's put it that way.
No, the worst. The worst. No, I'm good at teaching people who are really motivated, who want to actually get things done. I'm not good at playing the games, the bullshit games. I'm bad at that. Don't worry about being a writer. That's another thing. Help one person get what they want, and the writing takes care of itself. Okay? Now that you know how to write, like, again, functional stuff. Let's talk about setting up your docs. I like putting each chapter in its own doc. So here's what I do. This is like this isn't actually my book. This is an example. This is the Google Docs folder for a book. And then like each chapter, see how it has its own Google Doc, and then conclusion, introduction, right? And then there's extra content. That's like the parking lot. It makes things really easy for me, especially vomit draft wise, to write. That's all. I always do my vomit draft with in different docs. You don't have to. It's just what I like doing. Makes it easy for a lot of people. Then when I'm done, I'll usually edit. I'll do the first, we're going to talk about editing in a second. I'll do the first and second round of edit in there. And then the third round, I copy and paste each chapter into, oh wait, sorry. I'm getting ahead. For each doc, I copy and paste each chapter outline. So it looks like this, right? So each chapter has the actual outline I did. And then below that, I start writing. So it's there. And then when I'm done writing, I just delete it, do a few rounds of editing, then combine them, do the final round of editing. But you can do what works for you. I'm not saying that's not one of those things you have to do. The vomit draft, 250 words a day, those are really important. This is just a technique I like. Who hates typing and wants to possibly speak their book instead? Hit hand raise. Is there anyone out there like that? I bet there'll be a bunch.
Yeah, I've seen that question come up a bunch. I've been pushing people off to this point.
Now is when now we close the loop on it. All right. So I love this. This works really well. This book has a whole chapter, complete instructions. Also, it's on the course page, scribewriting.com/course. But let me summarize it for you so you understand basically. So the basic idea is you use a speech-to-text app. So Rev is a good one. It's rev.com or is an app on your phone. Temi.com or Temi's an app on your phone. The other zero with the 2-line symbol is
that the Scribe?
Otter. Otter AI. It's otter.ai, which is an app. And then below that is the Apple sign, obviously. Apple has a speech-to-text program built in. There are other ones. These are just the 4 that I use, that I like. Any of these work. Otter and Apple are immediate speech-to-text. Temi is AI speech-to-text. It costs, I think, 25 cents a minute now. Rev is $1.25 a minute, and it's humans transcribing. But you record into it, whichever one you like. Tell your story verbally, like as if you're talking to a friend, right? Start there, and then what you'll get back is a transcript. Now, think of that, though, as the pre-vomit draft. And then use that to write the vomit draft version. What I do is, damn it, Taylor, tell me to put in the slide here about step 4, showing about how I set up the docs. So I'll tell you guys how, this is in the book too. But basically, I put the vomit, literally on my screen, I set up 2 docs. On the left is the vomit draft, the pre-vomit draft, the transcript. On the right is like the clean doc that I'm going to write in. I don't try and edit the transcript. That's really, really hard to do. It makes it almost impossible. What I do is I'll either read it and just rewrite it over here clean, getting the gist, or sometimes I'll copy and paste and then I'll rewrite, I'll pull out sentences, then fill stuff in. But I use the transcript as a pre-vomit draft to write my vomit draft, right? There's literally a 20-page chapter in here that explains the intricate, annoying detail. Exactly how to
somebody's asking about Dragon. I think we took that one off the list because it got really bad, right?
Yeah, Dragon is no longer supported software. Do not use Dragon Dictate. Like, they don't make it anymore. It's no longer supported. At least I'm pretty sure about that. All right, this is just Michael saying so this is what Michael did. It worked really well. So he basically has a friend of his who's his avatar, his ideal reader, and fascinated with his story. So he sat with them, recorded podcasts with them, with his friend asking him questions, and then he got those all transcribed, and that was basically his pre-vomit draft. Worked well. This is what some people do. I'm not recommending this. This is just an option. Some people, for the vomit draft only, will write it by hand. Because that way it prevents them from going back. Here's someone who did it, another one, Denise. They both loved it. It's an option. Should you write sequentially?
Can I pause you there a quick second, Tucker? I'm just curious to see how people are going to tackle this, because I just want to know. Do you know the word count? I think the word count for typing on average is 40 words a minute, and for talking, it's about 140 words a minute. Does that sound right?
Yeah, talking is about that.
Yeah. That sounds like they're, wow, 40 words a minute. I guess I type fast.
Well, yeah, because
this is average.
Emily, it's not a typing test. Like a typing test, you could do 60, 70, 80, whatever. But like when you're thinking and going, it's tough, you know?
About
Wow,
80%.
7% handwrite the chapters. I would not have guessed that. All right, cool.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Should you write sequentially? Yes, unless you want to change it up. Like I said, do what works. How long should your book be? Tons of these questions. Your book should be as short as possible without leaving anything out, right? Have you guys noticed almost all nonfiction books should be at least 50% shorter? Do you know why? This is a crazy story. So this is true. So do I have a slide for this? Yes. So basically, bookstores for 100 years, book publishers sold only to bookstores, not to readers. And bookstores, because they have limited shelf space, right? Like there's just physical space. This is before Amazon, obviously, right? Limited shelf space. And so they don't want to display books with a cover out, because then it reduces by 3 the number of books they can have. So they want books displayed like this with the spine out. So bookstores demanded from book publishers that all books be wide enough to legibly print the title on the spine. That is why all nonfiction books are basically a minimum of 60,000 words. And I'm telling you, like how many nonfiction books have you read where it's like, this could be a blog post, or this could be a magazine article, or this could be 10,000, 20,000 words, maybe 30,000 words. The vast majority of nonfiction books I read are that way. So that's why most of our authors write books that are 30 to 40,000 words long, because they cut out all the bullshit. But whereas traditional publishers are like, no, you got to put bullshit in so the spine's wide enough. So bookstores are happy. I'm dead serious. It's crazy. I know. All right. Bookstores, yes. Made it too long. A common goal. So if you really want a goal, I would aim for between 100 and 199 pages, which is a good assumption is about 200 words per printed book page, not 200 words per Microsoft Word doc page. 200 words per printed book page is a good common assumption. You can do more or less. You can always finagle that, but that's a decent common assumption. So why 100 to 199? Guess. Because people and time investment. This is super weird. This is one of those Amazon buying things. Under 100 pages, there is a perception of value thing. A lot of people think a 70-page book isn't a real book, which now, by the way, that is not a hard and fast rule. Some of the best-selling books in history are like 50 pages. So you can write a book that's short and it can sell crazy. The 1 Minute Manager is like 50 pages. So like that's sold, God knows, 20 million copies or something stupid like that. So it's okay to be under, but I'm just saying that issue exists. And then over 200 pages, you start to see sales go down as well. Why? Because it's an investment in time. It's intimidating. There are a lot of people who look at the size of a book before deciding whether to buy it. So if you can get your book under 200 pages, less work, and you don't leave anything out, you're going to do better sales-wise. All right. There you go. What if you start writing and you realize something's off about your book? So if you start writing and realize you're confused, that's okay. This gets back to the caterpillar thing. It's a gift even. We hammer this a lot in the workshop. Writing a book, hold on, I can't. Yeah. Writing a nonfiction book especially is a process that forces you to clearly explain and understand, and explain what you think you already know. So in a lot of ways, writing is a discovery process, right? Does that make sense? I'll just tell you, in my experience, writing is the most effective way I've ever found for realizing I'm confused. I cannot tell you how many times I thought I understood something and I started writing it and realized, I don't understand it. It's a forcing function for clear thinking, all right? So like I highly, highly recommend that like if you are stuck writing and you realize you don't understand what you're doing, it may be a structure positioning problem, but it also may be a thinking problem, right? You don't understand it that well, which is okay. You just figure it out more. That's often what happens. It's the same thing I was teaching you with the butterfly stuff. A big part of this work is clarifying your own thinking. That's what Danessa said earlier, remember? She's like, and Pam too. I had no idea how much I would learn about my own stuff from writing a book. Just understand that's coming, and it's okay.
I want to flag, there's a question about length of word count turning into length of pages. It's entirely dependent on what size your book gets printed, and know that the number of word pages you have will not be the same as the number of pages in a book. You'll have more.
Do not in any way, shape, or form think about Microsoft Word pages. They are irrelevant. Word count only if you're thinking of length of book. And a rule of thumb, not the hard and fast rule, but a rule of thumb, 200 words per final printed page, meaning like in here, final printed page, 200 words, roughly.